So what happens when you feel that the language used to describe your child is stigmatising, condescending, or not sincere? Or maybe you feel that it's insightful and gives an understanding about your child. The process of identifying if a child has, for example, autism, or that there are signs that there is an individual difference can be consuming, whether that's because you are seeking a diagnosis or an explanation as to the way that they function. If or once your child receives information, it is more likely that a diagnosis or an explanation will be attached to a label. And in this video, I want to talk about outdated labels and if labels have a positive or negative impact on us parents as we advocate for our children's abilities to be recognised. Within special educational needs and special educational needs itself, there are so many labels to describe a young person's lived experience and situation. Labelling can lead to feelings of anger and fear and is reflected in various stigmatising responses such as rejection and discrimination. So in my experience, advocating for a child who is in receipt of special educational needs and has a diagnosis, having a label helped to identify his challenges and his struggle. It also helped, even though legally it is not required, for him to access an EHCP as well as access specialist schools and services. A label gives us a framework to understand something about a child, to understand that they are either autistic, dyslexic, epileptic or in receipt of special educational needs. But on the other hand, labels can determine how others respond to your child and how you as a parent choose to represent your child on their developmental journey. So I asked my child, what does he think of being described as special educational needs? And it had me thinking about what it feels like to be picked out for being special to access support. There's other words that would be more desirable, perhaps maybe bespoke, or I'm not sure. What are your thoughts on that? People's needs are different, but we know that these labels have been applied as part of a medical model to access support. So when I started on my journey of advocating for a child that had a diagnosis of Asperger's syndrome, this word was very popular at that time, whereas at the moment it is deemed as no longer to be in use, depending who you speak to. And this also seems to be the case for my son being described as having high functioning autism. So back in the late noughties, those are the words that I would use to describe my son's condition and the experiences that he was having on a daily basis. According to researchers at the University of Birmingham, research showed that terms such as autistic person, is autistic, differences, challenges, difficulties, neurotypical people, neurotypicals were among the most favourable by the survey group. However, unpopular labels such as Asperger's syndrome, person with autism, has autism, disease, disorder, were not in favour by these focus groups. So we can see that a large number of the respondents disliked the use of functioning labels, as they reported that these terms are divisive because they unnecessarily segregate autistic people, as they felt an inaccuracy as functioning varies across time and situation, and is harmful as it leads to so-called high-functioning individuals missing out on support and low-functioning people being ignored. So over the generations, the use of labels have evolved and some have discontinued. And it got me thinking about labels that I hear out and about in society. And one that comes to mind is the word handicapped. Handicapped over the centuries and the generations have changed its meaning. For some, it brings light to a person's disability, having to use a cap to beg for a living. And for others, it's used as a term used in gaming. And for me, I've noticed that the term handicapped is not necessarily used quite frequently in modern society. So for me, I've noticed the word handicapped is not necessarily used as much to describe somebody that has a disability. And another word is retarded. Growing up in England, that word was used as an insult and it was quite offensive to describe someone that had a limited mental capacity. And around the world, I've heard the word used often without people even batting an eyelid. And I guess there's no universal way of using labels, and it's more about what the label means to an individual or the communities that they live in. I personally feel that as parents, we have a role to represent our children in their diversities and in their individual differences. Well, you could be at an annual review, or you could be having an informal conversation with a teacher at the school gates perhaps, and using progressive language to advocate and represent your child can make a different impact on how people feel about the situation. For example, words such as learning disability, there's nothing wrong with that, but it can be changed to something such as learning difference or learning difficulties. And also not to feel so hard on ourselves if we get it wrong, because the only way we know how people want to be represented or how people want to be spoken about is to ask them themselves. Sometimes we come with knowledge that is different to their knowledge, but having those conversations is really important. A label is what you make it, because maybe over the years when your child is transitioning to adulthood, they may not want to use a label, or they may not want to be known in that particular way. They might find some new labels, such as being known as being neurospicy, or maybe they want to be known as being a person living with autism, or they want to be known as autistic. The choice is theirs, but at the same time, we don't want to narrow their opportunities and progress. So thinking about the language we use and ensuring that it's more progressive rather than limiting, we are able to make some small changes, hopefully along the way. So if you've got this far in the video, I'd love to know what your experiences are and what languages you use to represent your child or even to describe yourself. But for now, keep doing what you're doing, stay focused, stay empowered, and keep creating progress. Thank you for listening.